Thank you very much, Kavya. Thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me to this awesome conference. Let me start by sharing my screen really quickly. I hope that you can see it at your end. I'm going to put on the presenter mode. Oops. Here we go. Okay. I am going to talk about the relationship between money and happiness, and actually a little more broadly than that about success and happiness. Money is one of the conventional yardsticks of success. When you think of success, you can think of status, you can think of fame, you can think of power, you can think of money as well. And many of us think of money as being the most important marker of success. And so I want to talk broadly about happiness and success. One of the things that emerges in this field is that if you ask people, what do you think is the relationship between these two? Most people believe that happiness comes as a result of success. When we grow up, our mothers, our parents, our teachers, our well-wishers, mentors, they tell us that, look, I mean, work hard now and succeed, become rich, become famous, become powerful, and then happiness will naturally follow as a result. The interesting thing is that happiness may not follow, okay? And I want to talk a little bit about why that might be the case. But very quickly, I want to touch on this idea. Okay, here's the relationship that we think, right? Success leads to happiness when in fact it may not. Let me talk a little bit about the reverse direction of causality first, just a little bit. And that is that happiness leads to success. It turns out that that's a much more reliable direction of causality. Happiness leads to success much more than the reverse is true. And why might that be the case? I've tried to kind of illustrate it with some pictures here. Happier people are healthier. They show up for work more often. On average, in the US, happier people show up for 16 more days in a year than do unhappy people. Happier people are more collegial. They get along better with other people. You know, if you ask yourself this question, who would I rather team with? Somebody who's optimistic, somebody who's resilient, somebody who can see the lighter side of things, even when things are going badly, they can, find some sense of humor in it, or somebody who's pessimistic, is a wet blanket, constantly put you or your ideas down. Obviously, it's the former. It also turns out that happier people are more objective, more creative, and therefore are more productive. Okay, that is the bottom left figure there. So in short, happier people, studies have shown, earn more money than do less happy people. Okay, significantly more money. So we know that happiness leads to success, but what about the direction of causality I started with, which is success and happiness? Okay, does success promote happiness? It turns out that it's not necessarily the case. In the next about 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why success can, if you're not careful, often come in the way of happiness. And I'll try to focus on money in particular. Okay, success as defined by wealth. And I'm going to talk about 3 ways. Just so you know, I mean, this is a very big topic, and I actually have a book on the topic. The title of the book is If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? If you're so smart, why aren't you happy? And if you want to delve deeper into the topic, you can read the book. Let me talk about the first reason why success can lower happiness. And I call this a sin. You know, it's used the term very loosely. It's not a moral or ethical or religious transgression. I'm just using the word sin as a mistake that sometimes we make. So if you're not careful, if you're successful, you could end up chasing superiority, and it turns out that that's not very good for your happiness. Okay, and chasing superiority means comparing yourself to other people and wanting to be better than them in some dimension, wealth, let's say, or power, or beauty, or achievement, and so on and so forth. Now, most of us recognize instinctively that this is not very good for our happiness when we compare ourselves to other people. And in fact, lots of studies confirm that. And I'll talk about 1 or 2 reasons why chasing superiority lowers happiness. But why do we start to chase superiority even more vigorously once we become successful? One of the big reasons for it is that other people around us, you know, our peers, our direct reports, the world at large, the media, the press, when you're really successful, they start giving you signals that make you feel that you're superior to other people. We ran a study in which we asked participants to judge a joke. And in the study, we divided participants into 3 groups. And one group of participants, all groups of participants read the same joke, but one group thought that the purported author of that joke was a boss in an organization, the CEO of the organization. Another set thought that it was a peer, in the same level. And the third group of participants thought that the purported author of the joke was the janitor in the organization. And what we found is on a 10-point scale, the same joke was found to be more funny if the purported author is the boss. Okay, and you've probably seen manifestations of this in other settings, like you go to a party and everyone's looking at the boss, right, and laughing at his jokes. There's also a phenomenon that we have observed, which is that if a boss makes a suggestion in a meeting, for example, that's no longer really a mere suggestion. It's more like an order. Okay, but if a subordinate makes a suggestion, then you really do treat it as a suggestion. That is, that you can overrule it. Okay, so why does chasing superiority lower happiness? One of the big reasons for it is that when you chase superiority, you're setting yourself up for a big roller coaster ride, emotional roller coaster ride. On the days that you do well, in the years that you do well, you're going to feel really proud, you're going to feel happy. But sooner or later, that's going to be followed with days that you do not do well. And when you chase superiority, that can be highly misery provoking. And on top of that, there is a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. Basically, what it refers to is that when you are good at doing what you do, and for the first time you get an award, for example, you might feel really, really good. But the next time you get the same award, you perform at the same level, you're not going to feel quite as happy. And the third, fourth time it happens, you're going to feel less and less happy, up to a point where, the 10th time you do it, you're going to take it for granted, right? But God forbid, the 10th time you actually are not number one, you don't get that award, then you're going to feel downright miserable, okay? So this is one big reason why chasing superiority is not very good for happiness. There are other reasons too, including that other people don't like you as much, and we are highly, highly social as a species. And so when our relationships don't do well, then we don't feel happy. Okay, so speaking of relationships, let me get to sin number 2, which is to deprioritize relationships. When you're successful, you get a lot of adulation, you get a lot of pats on your back, you get a lot of positive strokes from people around you. And as a result, you start taking relationships for granted, including your personal relationships, which matter a lot. If there's one thing that we know about happiness, it is that you cannot sacrifice your relationships if you want to be happy. It's the single biggest determinant of your happiness. You need to have at least one really, really good friendship or relationship in your life for you to be truly happy. And what happens with successful people, particularly money, is that success starts coming in the way of happiness. You start to deprioritize your relationships. And part of it is just because of a physical kind of feature of wealth. When you get wealthy, you occupy a bigger home. And if you're really, really wealthy, you might even have a compound wall around your house, and you might even have a swimming pool in your house, maybe even a tennis court, right? And a media room where you can watch movies and so on. So you're physically less likely to get in touch with other people. You put a barrier between yourself and other people. That's part of the reason, but part of the reason is also psychological. It turns out that when you come into wealth in particular, okay, I'm not talking really about the other yardsticks of success as much here, like status and power and fame and so on, but wealth seems to actually make you meaner. You become meaner as a person when you become wealthy. Let me play you this short clip by one of my favorite researchers called Paul Piff on this topic.
Some of the first studies that we ran in this area looked at helping behaviors, something social psychologists call pro-social behavior. And we were really interested in who's more likely to offer help to another person, someone who's rich or someone who's poor. In one of the studies, we bring in rich and poor members of the community into the lab and give each of them the equivalent of $10. We told the participants that they could keep these $10 for themselves, or they could share a portion of it, if they wanted to, with a stranger who's totally anonymous. They'll never meet that stranger, and the stranger will never meet them. And we just monitor how much people give. Individuals who made $25,000, sometimes under $15,000 a year, gave 44% more of their money to this stranger than did individuals making $150,000, $200,000 a year. We've had people play games to see who's more or less likely to cheat to increase their chances of winning a prize. In one of the games, we actually rigged a computer so that die rolls over a certain score were impossible. You couldn't get above 12 in this game. And yet, the richer you were, the more likely you were to cheat in this game to earn credits toward a $50 cash prize, sometimes by 3 to 4 times as much. We ran another study where we looked at whether people would be inclined to take candy from a jar of candy that we explicitly identified as being reserved for children. Participating, I'm not kidding, I know it sounds like I'm making a joke. We explicitly told participants, this jar of candy is for children participating in a developmental lab nearby. They're in studies, this is for them, and we just monitored how much candy participants took. Participants who felt rich took 2 times as much candy as participants who felt poor. We've even studied cars, not just any cars, but whether drivers of different kinds of cars are more or less inclined to break the law. In one of these studies, we looked at whether drivers would stop for a pedestrian that we had posed wading across at a crosswalk. Now in California, as you all know, because I'm sure we all do this, it's the law to stop for a pedestrian who's wading across. So here's an example of how we did it. That's our Confederate off to the left, posing as a pedestrian. He approaches as the red truck successfully stops. In typical California fashion, it's overtaken by the bus who almost runs our pedestrian over. Now here's an example of a more expensive car, a Prius, driving through, and a BMW doing the same. So we did this for hundreds of vehicles on several days, just tracking who stops and who doesn't.
Okay, so money makes you meaner, and that's another reason why you start to deprioritize relationships. Let me talk about the final reason before I kind of talk about some antidotes to these 3 sins. The third reason is becoming overly control-seeking. When you're successful, that obviously means that other people think that you're good at making decisions, you're good at handling resources. So they reward you with these yardsticks of success: more control, more status, more power, more fame, more money, etc. And if you're not careful, that can make you addicted to that power and control. And so you become more control-seeking. And this is manifested as in 2 main ways. You become more control-seeking of other people. You want them to behave like you want them to behave, and you're unhappy if they don't. And also control over outcomes. You want to live in a certain kind of house. You want certain kind of outcomes to occur to you, and you want to go on certain vacations, and so on and so forth. And that's not very good for your happiness either. Now, why is being overly control-seeking not very good? Well, one big reason is that life, as you probably noticed, is like Donald Trump's hair. It's very difficult to control. Okay, and so if you tether your happiness to things working out exactly like you want them to be, other people behaving like you want them to be, I'm sure that if you're married, you've discovered this, right, with your spouse, that you might have aspirations that they eat in a certain way, or dress in a certain way, or behave a certain way in society, go to the gym, whatever. And if your happiness depends on them behaving like you want them to, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of unhappiness. Okay, it also turns out that overly control-seeking people are more likely to exhibit risky behavior, including doing unethical things. Okay, and that catches up with them. And finally, people who are highly control-seeking, the picture on the lower right shows, become very obsessive. They become very obsessive in their pursuits of their goals, and they're not harmonious. Okay, the H represents harmony, the O represents obsessive. You don't want to be dull, of course, okay? And overly control-seeking people are not very dull. But on the other hand, they become very obsessive, so they start sacrificing not just their relationships, also their health and other things, important things like that. Okay, so how to avoid the happiness self-sabotage? Well, let me talk about 3 different ways to do this. One is, instead of chasing superiority, you're better off pursuing flow. Now, most of us, I'll talk about what flow is in a minute, but most of us are aware that chasing superiority is not very good for our happiness, but we nevertheless end up doing it. We compare ourselves to other people. We want to be the best, and we look at other people who are better than us and feel insecure or jealous or envious in order to get inspired to beat them. Okay, and we think that even though it makes us unhappy, it's a very reliable way to motivate ourselves in order to excel, in order to become better at what we do. It turns out, though, if you look at the research, that in the long run, particularly not just tomorrow, next week, but 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, if that is the way in which you motivate yourself, you're probably going to burn out. Not just that, you're also going to make a lot of enemies. Okay, a much better way to motivate yourself and to become better at what you do is to pursue flow. And what is flow? In short, flow experiences are those in which you completely lose track of time. You get so involved in the activity that you forget about time. Okay, so it's intrinsically motivating, something that's your passion, those kinds of activities, and that's a much better determinant of your long-term success than is chasing superiority. I have a couple of books that I would recommend in this regard. One is called Grit by Angela Duckworth. It's on the topic of how grit and perseverance are the most reliable determinants of success. And another one called Peak by the recently deceased Professor Anders Ericsson. Okay. The second sin is deprioritizing relationships, and the antidote is obviously the opposite, which is to reprioritize relationships. Okay. If you can afford to do this, this is what I would recommend. Take at least 2 vacations a year, one with your family and one with a nice, your closest group of friends. Okay. And put in these vacations on your calendar before the year comes up. Okay. So if you wait until the last minute, it's probably not going to happen, as you may have discovered. Now, of course, we are in a lockdown situation, so this may be a somewhat impractical idea at this point. But when we get back to quote unquote normal, I would suggest that, maybe 6 months ahead of time, just block off time on your calendar for a vacation with your family and another one with your friends. Also, every week, spend a little bit of time with your closest friends and family. Maybe it is to play tennis, maybe it is to catch up over some drinks, maybe it's to go for a walk. Okay, and with the spouse, I'd say maybe even on a daily basis, if you can go for a walk or something like that. I know this is sounding like it's a kind of a programmed way to go about things. Maybe it looks cold and calculated, but our lives are so busy nowadays, okay, that unless you do this, it's going to slip through the cracks. Okay, so that's what this is, reprioritizing relationships. And I'm going to skip this video in the interest of time. Maybe we'll get back to it in the Q&A. And let me talk about control-seeking behavior, what is the antidote for it. So when we think of control is very, very important for us to be happy in life, okay? But when we think of control in the external domain, okay? In the domains of other people, controlling other people or outcomes. When in reality, there's a whole another universe of control that's available to us. That's our internal domain. Control over our own mind, control over our own feelings. And the idea is to become increasingly good at regulating your emotions, of being happy, even if not happy, at least content, at least equanimous, regardless of what outcomes you're dealt in life. Okay, and this is, of course, a tall order, and it'll take a lot of practice, but there is a lot of different things that we can do, including practicing what are called emotion regulation tactics. And also mindfulness and meditation. So if you can do those things, and maybe I can elaborate on these in the Q&A session a little bit, you're likely to become increasingly better at gaining internal control, like Gandhi was or Nelson Mandela was. And when you do that, then you don't need as much external control. Not that you won't want to persuade other people to do what you think is right, or not that you won't aspire to achieve certain outcomes, but that feverishness, that desperation, that unless these things happen, unless these people behave the way that I would like them to, I'm going to be deeply unhappy, will go away. You'll be in a more stable, more calm emotional state. And when good things happen, you'll be even more happy, okay, if you start taking this internal control. So in short, let me just summarize by saying that we often think that success is the prerequisite for happiness, when in fact, for all these reasons that I talked about, and there's other reasons that I can get into, including not trusting other people or being overly mind addicted and so on, success can actually undermine your happiness if you're not careful. And the way to avoid that is by practicing these 3 things. And I also want to leave you with another big message that I talked about at the beginning, which is that try and lead a happy life, because the reverse direction of causality from the one that we've talked about, that is that happiness to success, is a much more reliable direction of causality. And it's been shown in the research, especially in the last about 20 years across a variety of cultures and contexts. Okay, and with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.
Okay, Raj, that was very, very enlightening, if I may say. Okay, Raj, one of the things I wanted to ask you, when we compare ourselves to others, and one of the easiest way to do it is money, because money is comparable. So is that a recipe for happiness, instant gratification, or instant gratification in the short term and unhappiness in the long term?
Okay, so first of all, you're assuming that when you compare yourself to other people on money, you are the one who's wealthier, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
there is a chance that you're not, okay? And there's always going to be somebody who's wealthier than you are.
Obvious, correct.
Okay. And unless you're Mukesh Ambani or something, but even he is probably comparing himself to
He's
somebody
number
else.
4 right now.
Number 4. See, so the only person who can really afford to feel happy then on that dimension is maybe Jeff Bezos or somebody like that, who's number 1. And even their position is not guaranteed. I remember this interview with Roger Federer in 2009, I think it was, when he'd been number 1 for 4 or 5 years together on tennis. And he was saying that actually number 1 makes him more insecure because there are people, nipping away at his heels, wanting to replace him. And he much preferred the journey to number 1 than being number 1. It's very anxiety provoking. So the short answer is no, it's not a very reliable determinant of your happiness, because your position there is tentative, it's temporary. And also, you get adapted. First year you're number 1, you're going to be happy. Second year less happy, and so on and so forth, which I talked about earlier. So it's not
okay. Now, Raj, people of a certain generation, have grown up in their childhood. They saw deprivation. Very, very simple things of life were taken as luxuries then. There was a prime minister called Charan Singh in 1979, in announcing his budget. He said, "I'm taxing luxuries like toothpaste." Okay. So in 1979, toothpaste for luxury. So we have grown up in a culture which is very scarcity, this thing. So we try to hoard, and for us, a very, very important measure of success is money. You think that's preventing many of us from discovering happiness?
Look, up to the point where basic needs are met, money is very, very important. Okay, so I haven't conveyed it, and I don't know if at some level there was a message that came out unintentionally that never give any importance to money. No, not at all. I mean, money is very, very important, especially up to the point where basic needs are met. And I would, for one, categorize toothpaste as basic needs, not a luxury. And I think most people would. So if you are not sure where your next meal is going to come from, if you don't have adequate medical attention, if you can't educate your children, etc., go for the money. It's very, very important. Even beyond it, I would say that, once you have your basic needs met, money is very, very important, because it gives us autonomy. You can hire somebody to do things that you don't like doing, cleaning your dishes, for example, or walking the dog, or what have you. And so it can free up time and give you more time that you can spend in the ways that you find meaningful. It's very, very important for that. The thing, let me just add one more point here. What I'm saying is that most of us recognize these good things about money, and we pursue money for that reason. But there's also another reason that many of us pursue money for, and that is a bad reason, for happiness at least. Okay, and I'm not talking about moral sense. And the reason many of us pursue money is to show off, is to tell other people, signal to other people that, hey, look, I'm the richest, I'm better than you are, I'm more powerful than you are. That is not a very good thing, not a very good reason for acquiring money or seeking it. And if you can sever that link that many of us have, it's called a materialistic pursuit of money, right? It's not for the functional pursuit of money, it's for the materialistic purposes. That is not very good. That's what I'm saying.
My point, Raj, was that when you're in a scarcity mode, because while you may not actually be physically, factually in a scarcity mode, but your childhood, these things, you've seen deprivation at some level or the other. And it continues, perhaps, that state of mind. Would that deprive people of happiness?
Yeah, absolutely. It will deprive you of money. It will deprive you of happiness. And you bring up a very, very good point. Most of us are creatures of habit. And many of us understand this when it comes to our physical habits, right? Like smoking or whatever. But actually, our thought patterns, which are also habits, are much, much more powerful in terms of affecting our happiness. And one of the big mindsets that many of us have is the scarcity orientation. That is that my win is going to come at a loss to somebody else. Life is a zero-sum game, and I don't have enough, and I need more. Even if you actually objectively have enough resources to not just take care of your own needs, but maybe even your children's and grandchildren's needs. Many of us still have that scarcity orientation. And one of the larger points that I make in the book is to try and nurture an abundance orientation as opposed to a scarcity orientation. And that is going to be critical for you to be happy. And that is going to have implications beyond money. It's going to have implications for how altruistic you are in terms of giving your time or, helping other people with your skills and so on and so forth. And that is, I think, critical for you to be happy. If you look at all these people that we extol as, as inspirational figures, especially in the domain of happiness, like Buddha or Gandhi or Jesus, they were all abundance-oriented people, even though many of them came from very scarcity in terms of life circumstances, backgrounds.
Raj, just a minute back, you alluded to certain things which money can do, which can enhance your happiness. You said something about getting household help, and so what are the other things which you should use money for to kind of enhance your happiness?
Yeah, so I'll talk about 2 or 3 other things here. One is to buy experiences as opposed to material goods. Okay, it turns out that we actually derive a lot more happiness from experiences, even though in a sense there's nothing tangible to hold on to once that experience is over, like for example a vacation or a good party or movie and so on, as opposed to material things. The second thing that
as opposed to even an Apple iPhone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Apple iPhone would definitely be a materialistic thing. Of course, oftentimes there is a blurry boundary. Some of these materialistic things give you experiences too. Okay, so you can use the Apple iPhone for experiences, of course, but you can also use it as a material good to show off to other people, for example. Yes. Right. So the more you use it as an experience, the happier you're going to be.
So, what experiences are you talking about?
Yeah, so I'm talking about things like taking a vacation or, going and having a nice dinner with the family or learning a new skill, etc. Okay, anything that we consider to be worthy to spend money on and that we like to do. And experiences are defined as things that don't have a tangible object that you can hold on to at the end of it. Okay, so you just have memories at the end of it. So that is one. The second is to, we already talked about outsourcing things that you don't like to do. The third thing that I would suggest, and by the way, there's a great book on this topic. It's called Happy Money by Mike Norton and Elizabeth Dunn. They talk about 5 different things you can do with money that could make you happier. And the third thing that they talk about is being kind to other people. Okay, believe it or not, being charitable, being altruistic, and it doesn't have to be the classic poster child version of this where you kind of give money to a orphanage or things like that. It could be to donate to your own kind of maids, for example, educate their children, or buy a nice gift for somebody, a family member who's suffering. Okay, things like that, helping them with an operation, paying for an operation. So being charitable, it turns out, is one of the best kept secrets of happiness. Dalai Lama said this. He said, if you want to make others happy, be compassionate. If you want to make yourself happy, be compassionate. Okay, so and the book talks about a couple of other things, including doing spending on extraordinary things, like for example, if you've always dreamt about going to Antarctica, okay, so doing that and saving the money in order to do that.
Okay, there's been a question, people are wanting to know the names of the 3 books. So one was Grit, that you mentioned, and Grit is by
Angela Duckworth.
Okay, and the second?
Yeah, Duckworth is, as you think it might be spelled, Peak, as in mountain peak. Okay, by Anders Ericsson. And there's another co-author, I think it's Robert Poole, if I'm not mistaken, but Anders Ericsson is the main researcher.
Happy Money is by Elizabeth Dunn and Michael Norton.
Michael Norton, correct.
Okay, fantastic. So, Raj, what time is it out there?
It is 5 past 10 or 10 past 10.
Okay. So thank you for joining us.
Of course.
This must have been your first engagement in the day. I hope you have a productive day. It was wonderful to have you, and all the best.
Thank you very much, and wonderful to be here, and all the best, everybody. And I hope that the conference. This is the final session,
Yes,
right?
we saved the best for the last, Raj.
Yeah,
So here you are.
very kind of you. Very kind of you. Appreciate
Yeah.
it, and I wish you all the very best.
Yeah, and we started with someone you know very well, which is our India's chief economic advisor.
Ah, yeah, Subbu. Yeah,
So Krishnamurti Subbu was here with us. He
wonderful.
started
Yeah,
off, and now we are ending with you.
thank you, thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Raj.